Welcome to an episode of Thinkception, where I give you a way to think about the way you think. What is the relationship between creativity, humor, and horror? First, let's see. What is creativity? Well, creativity is putting two or more things together to make a new and useful thing. For instance, we could take a jar of jelly, a jar of peanut butter, and bread and make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Awesome. Well, at least it was creative the first time somebody made one. So what's humor? Humor is a cognitive experience that provokes laughter and amusement. So what is horror? Horror is a cognitive experience that promotes fear, shock, or disgust. So what makes something humorous? And what makes something horrific? First, let's take a look at what is normal. Normal is something that is expected or typical. Now, I'm not here to tell you what I think is normal, but I am here to tell you how it relates to humor and horror. So, my previous experiences are going to be much different than your previous experiences. Therefore, my normal is going to be very different from your normal, which explains why some people are scared of spiders and other people are not, and why some people find certain jokes funny and other people do not. So let's consider somebody's state of normality, which I will represent by this shiny thing. And then, if we violate that state of normal, and it provokes laughter or amusement, then you're probably experiencing humor. If we deviate from the norm, and it provokes fear, shock, or disgust, then you're probably experiencing horror. Now, much like Newton's third law of every action has an equal and opposite reaction, or the concept of potential and kinetic energy, or the concept of cause and effect, everything has some fashion of tension and release, or, when speaking of cognition, for our example, tension and reaction. So let's draw a picture. In order to experience anything, we're going to need time to experience it. And in order to react to something, we're going to need some kind of violation to react to. This violation is going to be some deviation from what we would consider our balanced self. When we deviate from the balance, tension builds, which is going to motivate us to react. And then there's a period of time in which we are actually reacting, which will then eventually release the tension, relieving us back to our balanced self. I like to call this the cognitive reaction process. So let's plug humor into this. The violation may come into a form of, say, a punchline of a joke, which would challenge the normal way or expected way that we would think the joke would go, which quickly builds tension, motivating us to react in the form of laughter. And then the laughing subsides and we are relieved back to our normal state. So let's plug horror into this. The violation with horror might come in the form of some sort of threat, threatening our normal way of thinking, building tension, motivating us to react in the form of fear. And then once we feel safe again and the fear subsides, we are relieved back to the normal self. Now let's plug this into creativity. So the violation for creativity might be a challenge, like challenging the way we might normally think, building tension, motivating us to react in the form of the creative process. And once we resolve the challenge, we are relieved back to the normal. What's interesting about all three of these experiences is that they're related in the fact that the balance is defined by a normal train of thought. So when we deviate from the normal train of thought, we might experience humor, creativity, or horror. And when you go through one of these processes, you're actually connecting new dots. Neurological processes are happening in your brain to create new thoughts based on previous other thoughts being connected. So what happens is your normal is actually changing. So you are defining a new normal train of thought, by going through this process. Let's rewind and take a look at the humor graph again. So sure, there's a punchline and you'll probably laugh at it, but there's more going on here. So when we introduce something that's a deviation from the norm in the punchline, then we need to connect dots together in order to understand the joke. So we're actually putting together two or more things to create a new thought. That is the creative process. So you're actually going through the creative process in order to understand the joke and then laugh at it. So how does this relate to horror? So when there's a threat, you may feel fear, and some of you might be familiar with the concept of fight or flight, but we have the cognition to make other decisions, like the creative process. So we can actually use the creative process to overcome the threat or at least conquer the fear. We could even go as far to say that the creative process is a reaction to the violation of fear, because fear will put us off balance. And when we conquer fear, we actually change our train of thought and what we consider normal. So let's review. Humor introduces new thinking and exercises creativity in a fun way, kind of like you would exercise your body. Horror challenges us to think in new ways, and we can conquer fear through the use of creativity. And creativity is just simply the process of thinking in new ways. So that is how they're all related. I challenge you to think about how and why you react to certain situations, and how it fits into the graph. My words of wisdom that I leave you with is be foolish, be fearless, and be creative. Thanks for joining me for my episode of Thinkception, where I give you a way to think about the way you think. Sandwich!